In Austin, Texas, the so-called love triangle murder trial continues. This is Texas v. Kaitlin Armstrong, where the defendant is accused of murdering Mo Wilson, a professional cyclist and alleged romantic rival of Kaitlin. Kaitlin flew to Costa Rica on her sister's passport shortly after Mo's death, and prosecutors allege it was an attempt to flee the country. And they argue that this is supported by the fact that once she got to Costa Rica, she dyed her hair, got facial plastic surgery, and went by at least 3 or 4 different aliases. On day 7, the prosecution put on 5 more witnesses in their case in chief. The first was Detective David Portnoy, who also testified at the end of day 6. Detective Portnoy works for Austin PD's Digital Forensics Department. And on the morning of day 7, he started out by talking about a cell phone's IMEI. In other words, a digital fingerprint. And looking at the IMEI on these devices, Detective Portnoy was able to conclude whose devices these all were. Next, he went over some of the extraction data that he got from these devices. This data includes information as to where a device was when it was being used. And one interesting thing about Kaitlin's phone extraction data is that it showed that on May 11th, 2022, she had turned off her phone between 7:30 p.m. and 9:47 p.m. On its own, this doesn't necessarily mean anything. People turn off their phones for all kinds of reasons. But remember that in this case, the jury already heard about Kaitlin's Google searches while she was already in Costa Rica. And one of those was a query about whether IMEI can be detected even if a phone isn't being used or isn't on or something like that. Now remember also that on day 6, Detective Connor testified that she had the impression that although Kaitlin said during her initial interview with Detective Connor that she wanted to leave, her body language suggested that she wanted to stay, perhaps to get some information. So it could very well be that Kaitlin shot Mo, and then afterwards her mind started to go down a path of trying to figure out if she could be captured in these various ways. I know that the prosecution has set up a framework for the jury that this was all basically meticulously planned out by Kaitlin months in advance, starting from December 2021 when she initially bought that gun. But personally, I don't see it that way. To me, it definitely seems that she did, in fact, have a desire to kill Mo. But if she had had a plan to kill Mo, it seems to me that these various search queries would have happened long before she ever actually killed Mo, not when she was already way down in Costa Rica. So to me, this seems like she had a very profound and deep hatred and jealousy of Mo, and then finally snapped when Mo showed up in town. And then after realizing what she had done, she maybe tried to think on the fly as to how to get herself out of this situation. But that's just my impression, my own personal opinion. Feel free to disagree with that. Okay, so on to the second witness of the day. This was Brandi Standfield from the DA's Digital Forensics Unit. Ms. Standfield started her testimony by showing a number of photos to the jury. This included a photo of Kaitlin with a firearm from Caitlin's Instagram account. It also included a logbook of names and dates from people signing into a gun range, and Caitlin's signature as, once again, Allison Page. Then there were some photos of Kaitlin after her cosmetic surgery. One is of some scarring by her hairline. Another couple are of her with a bandage across her lips and across her nose, and still others are even more detailed shots of her face post-op. Then Ms. Standfield went over 54 WhatsApp messages between Kaitlin and Dr. Bodilla, the Costa Rican plastic surgeon. Kaitlin appears to have been making an inquiry about rhinoplasty surgery, and it seems to be in Spanish with a translation to English. Interestingly, we see a new alias used, since it appears she's going in the conversation by Ari Roberts. In the messages, she appears to be pretty damn sure that she wants to proceed with rhinoplasty. She is not at all on the fence. And she also insists on having her consultation with Dr. Bodilla on a day when the surgery room is also available to do the procedure. So this does suggest that she has already made up her mind and she wants it done ASAP. Okay, so the next witness was David Luppino. Mr. Luppino is the general manager of the range at Aston, which, as you can guess, is a firing range in Austin, Texas. Mr. Luppino provided to the court some business records, which he verified as true and accurate. One of these was a vendor bill from Ammo Inc. The bill shows a purchase of 9mm ammunition for $44,000. I can't say that I've ever bought ammunition before, so I don't know how much ammunition that can buy a person. If you have an idea and you are more familiar with firearms and ammunition and the costs of doing all of that, let me know in the comments down below. But anyway, then Mr. Luppino also provided a single day sales transaction from January 12th, 2022 to Kaitlin Armstrong. So is this Kaitlin actually making a purchase, or is this Kaitlin pretending to be Kaitlin as early as January 2022? Before we get some clarity on that, Mr. Luppino brings in one more piece of evidence. This was a notation that the 9mm ammo ink purchase was made under a range account for someone named Jill Zann, or Zann. I apologize in advance if I am mispronouncing that last name. Now, who is that, you might ask? Well, it just so happens to be the state's next witness. Jill testified that for about 2 years, she lived in the same building in Aston as Christine, Kaitlin's sister. Jill said that she was very experienced and comfortable with firearms, and so one day the two Armstrong sisters approached her, asking if she would be willing to teach them firearm safety. So in January 2022, Kaitlin brought her black 9mm Sig Sauer to Jill's home for a safety lesson. And afterwards, the three of them all went to a gun range together. Next, Jill introduced some photos and videos of Kaitlin at the gun range that day. She said she couldn't remember whether or not Kaitlin was a good shot, but she did remember that Kaitlin did in fact hit the target. Now, an interesting point to note here is that on cross-examination, Jill said that she did not know what a cable lock is. And so she said she did not teach Kaitlin anything about a cable lock. This is potentially an important point for the defense because when the gun was found, it had a cable lock on it. From my research, a cable lock is an inexpensive device that goes through the weapon and physically prevents the firearm from being fired by blocking the barrel of the gun. And so I think what the defense is trying to suggest here is that because the Sig Sauer had a cable lock on it, this means that someone other than Kaitlin probably fired the gun, because otherwise Kaitlin was too inexperienced to know what a cable lock was, and all of the people that taught her how to use the firearm also didn't know what a cable lock was. The only problem with that is that there still is totally a way that Kaitlin could have learned about cable locks from someone else, for example, from someone at the firing range. Anyway, on to the last witness of the day. This was Steve Aston, a forensic scientist specializing in firearm ballistic research and testing. Now, his testimony is important because Kaitlin is drowning in digital receipts that place her at the scene of the crime on May 11th, 2022. But what if Kaitlin is just a creepy, stalkerish, jealous person who spent the whole day following Mo but did nothing else? That is at least a theoretical possibility here. So in my personal opinion, the state really does need something to anchor Kaitlin's presence inside Kaitlin Cash's apartment that night to really package this well for the jury. And the state is essentially doing that in two ways. First is the DNA evidence that was found on the handlebars of Mo's bicycle after it was found trashed in the bamboo forest. And the second way is with the ballistic matchup of the shell casings found in Cash's apartment to Kaitlin's 9mm Sig Sauer. And that's ultimately what this expert testimony was trying to achieve. Unfortunately, though, as is sometimes common with expert witnesses, Mr. Aston's testimony was very technical and dry. Now, it's hard to come across a good expert witness who is not only very highly credentialed and very highly knowledgeable in their area of study, but is also very clear in their explanations and engaging to the jury. This reminds me of the Gwyneth Paltrow ski collision case. Paltrow's team scored probably one of my favorite expert witnesses of all time when they called Dr. Irving Scher, a biomechanical engineering expert who specialized in winter sports. Now, I am not particularly strong in hard STEM subjects, like at all. As I like to say, math is magic and science is sorcery. But Dr. Scher is an absolute wizard of physics, and even I was able to understand in detail what he was talking about.
If you do the calculations with the correct equations and only his mass, you get over 4,000 newtons when he lands. Actually, you get 11,056 newtons. So if he were to fall to the snow using Dr. Bame's calculation method the correct way, then just Mr. Sanderson falling, not Miss Paltrow involved at all, he could get rib fractures.
If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend watching his testimony to see what an excellent scientific expert witness testimony really looks like. In fact, I'm linking it in the description below so you can check it out. But anyway, back to Mr. Aston. He basically went over the fact that every firearm is a little bit unique in that it has grooves and cuts inside the barrel that are somewhat random. And so when a bullet is fired, those grooves and cuts from inside the barrel give the bullet a unique marking as viewed through a microscope. And so Mr. Aston testified that the way that someone analyzing it is that they are looking for agreements and disagreements. In other words, they're looking for the ways in which the bullets and casings match up within the same crime scene. And then they're looking for the ways in which those match up with rounds tested in the lab. According to Mr. Allen, slight disagreements are expected because the pressure it takes to fire a bullet from a gun may cause the images to not line up perfectly. But he said he's always looking for majority agreements. And here he says that he found significant agreements across the board. So after showing what all of this looked like for the jury through various images, he was able to reach an expert conclusion. And that, of course, is that the crime scene projectiles were fired from Kaitlin's 9mm 6 Hour. Now, the defense, of course, focused a lot of energy on this cross-examination of this witness. And that's because it's really important to the defense to try to paint a picture of this kind of ballistic testing as essentially unreliable junk science. And so one of the ways in which they did that was by bringing up an article from the Association of Firearms and Tool Mark Examiners. This article essentially argued that the lines found in test firings could actually closely resemble two entirely different guns. And this is honestly a pretty good way of bringing in some good authority to create some doubt as to the reliability of this witness's testimony. And at the end of the day, Mr. Aston did agree that his ultimate opinion on the matter is his subjective opinion. And he said that the determination as to whether there's a certain level of agreement can differ from examiner to examiner. So personally, I do think that this ballistic evidence does end up on something of a weak note here, and it's probably the strongest point in the trial that we've seen for the defense. But what do you think? Is the digital evidence here just too much for you to consider that Kaitlin might have not done it? Or do you think that the state here does really need to make a showing of this kind of ballistic or DNA evidence to place Kaitlin inside Cash's apartment on the night of May 11th, 2022. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with those YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more trial content like this, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is uploaded. See you in the next one.